श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरि ओम। गणानां त्वां गणपतिगुं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पदान शृण्वन्नोतिभिश्रीरसादनं प्रणो देवी सरस्वती वाजेभिर्वाजनीवती धीनामभिप्रियवतु। गणेशाय नमः। सरस्वते नमः। श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरि ओम। ओम नमो गणपते रुद्राय। ओम नमस्ते रुद्रमन्यवंतोतैषवे नमः। नमस्ते अस्तु धन्वने बाहुभ्यामुदते नमः। या दैषु शिवतमा शिवं बभूव ते धनु शिवा सरव्याय तवतया नो रुद्रमृणया। या ते रुद्र शिवा तनूर घोरा मा प्रकाशिनी तया नस्तनुवासन्तमया गिरिशं दापिता प्रति। या विषं गिरिशं दास्ते विभक्षन्तवे। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति।
Revered Chancellor, Sir, distinguished guests, and dear friends and dearest students, we have just now completed 3 days of marathon sessions where we discussed the ramifications of the program of value orientation in higher education. Revered Chancellor blessed this program some time back, and he worked ceaselessly to make it a real success. I, on behalf of the university and my colleagues, would like to take this opportunity of expressing our gratitude to our revered Chancellor who has been the cause of the success of this National Symposium. These 3 days were not 3 days, they were 3 seconds. And we still recall the clarion call which he gave on the first day when he said that education of head and heart and hand is a prerequisite for the development of the man, the full man. It's very heartening to share with our revered Chancellor, though he was invisibly present in all the sessions, but visibly also present in bulk of the sessions, the feelings of our distinguished delegates coming from various parts of India and getting so much impressed by the beauty and charm of this place. The most beautiful and charming person is the divine self, and he is the major attraction. They came like the proverbial bees and tried to suck the utmost nectar from the beautiful lotus. Revered Chancellor, sir, I wouldn't like to dilate on this issue because my task is very specific. I have to mention that there are 3 items of the agenda. First is the submission of the reports of the National Symposium. The second is chairperson's observation. And the third and the last but not the least is the revered Chancellor's benedictory address. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce to this audience 2 eminent persons. Dr. Jagadish Narayan will present briefly the report of the National Symposium. Dr. Jagadish Narayan is basically by profession a civil engineer. But slowly and steadily, he has become a human engineer. He was in the famous Roorkee University on the staff. Then he had a stint outside India in the New York, because all nice people are being sought after by people outside. Then I had the good fortune of receiving him in the Planning Commission as the Vice Chancellor of the Roorkee University, where we would higgle and haggle on many matters. But I could see in him the spark of a man who likes human values. And from '83, he has been the Secretary of the Association of Indian Universities. It has been a new chapter in the history of the Association of Indian Universities with his becoming the Secretary. I know it personally that in and out he has been thinking of giving a new orientation to higher education through the medium of value orientation. We are very happy that right from the day the AIU team visited this place, they came, saw, and they were conquered. For them, seeing was believing. Because whatever we write, people may not understand, because their linguistic facility may not be as good as of anyone. But when the high-level visiting team came here, they saw what we were doing. And that was the beginning of our intimate association with the AIU. He was kind, and they got the meeting of the AIU arranged here in our proximity, and we're extremely grateful to Dr. Jagadish Narayan and his boss, President of the AIU, Dr. G. Ram Reddy, whom you heard day before yesterday. They are both committed to the values for which Bhagwan has been doing all what is possible since so many years. I would now like to mention about our sage-looking Professor ECG Sudarshan. He's a young professor, but his vast experience. He's working in a number of places, in Madras, in Bangalore, and in Texas, USA. My distinguished predecessor, Professor Gokak, introduced him as a 3-in-1 while talking about his contribution at the time of the 1985 convocation. He's a product of the Madras University, and he has done his further education in many universities abroad. And though he's a theoretical physicist, but he's a metaphysicist to the core. I was very much struck by his very outstanding theory which he propounded on the occasion of the 1985 convocation, binocular vision. I had not heard of binocular vision, where he thought that it's better to combine spirituality and science. We are very fortunate. He has got the Padma Vibhushan, which is next to Bharat Ratna. He has also got the Third World Countries Award, the first science award, which is equivalent to Nobel Award. What's more important, he is committed to our programs. Anyone who is Sai Ratna does not need Bharat Ratna. We are grateful to Professor Sudarshan. I want to share with our revered Chancellor, though he knows. Professor Sudarshan, like others, did not miss even a single minute of the meetings. He was absorbing, he was hearing, and he was learning. I'm sure that what he will share with us will give us the proper way to find ourselves on the path which our revered Chancellor has chalked for us. I have no doubt that both our dignitaries who are present here will do justice to the tasks assigned to them.
Revered Chancellor and friends, I have great pleasure in presenting the general report of the National Symposium on Value Orientation in Higher Education held at Prasanthi Nilayam, September 24th to 26th. The National Symposium, organized at Prasanthi Nilayam by the Shri Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, expresses its gratitude to the revered Chancellor for having taken timely initiative in organizing the symposium on value orientation in higher education these last few days. We, the delegates, deeply appreciate the opportunity given to a large number of vice-chancellors, educationists, and scientists to participate in this national symposium and see for themselves the setting in which the program of education in human values is taking a concrete shape at this institute. In this national symposium, the presence of the participants who have come from different parts of the country indicates the importance attached to the program and the urgency with which it needs to be implemented on a large scale in this country. The National Symposium records that the theme is in line with the recommendations made in the National Policy of Education as approved by the Parliament of India. The participation in the National Symposium was full and complete, and the fact that as many as 18 theme papers on the subject were presented at the symposium is an indication of the interest of the educationists. Revered Chancellor, Sir, it has been sheer ecstasy to observe the sublime atmosphere, beautiful infrastructure, and soothing environment which have been created here at Prasanthi Nilayam in a short period of a few years, and also the provision of a variety of educational, creative, and construction programs in the different campuses of this institute, exceptionally conducive to the promotion of human excellence based on fundamental values. We have noted with great admiration and pleasure the organization of daily and year-round curricular and co-curricular activities for students in and outside the classes, where the emphasis is on the proper flowering of intellect and intuition, which is the hallmark of the growth of an integrated and complete personality. The fusion of various kinds of attributes with accent on academic excellence and intuitive development needs to be seen to be believed. For all of us, it was an eye-opener. We do express our belief that Sri Sathya Sai Institute is a pioneer in this much neglected field of educational renaissance, which has been overlooked over the last 4 decades since our independence. The National Symposium strongly recommends that information about this institute's programs should be widely disseminated through publications and other media all over the country. We would like to reiterate strongly, dispelling any doubt, that the aims and objectives of the program here are very much in line with the accepted parameters of promotion of human excellence and cherished values based on secularism and the accepted principles of unity of faiths and religions all over the world. These objectives are acceptable to everyone in any part of the world. The National Symposium would like to make the following recommendations for consideration and implementation by various educational institutions and appropriate authorities in the context of what has been said as an outcome of in-depth deliberations and observations during this National Symposium. Recommendation number 1. It is high time that a self-consistent and universal system of values, which can be regarded as a theory of the human personality, is accepted as the basis on which syllabi and courses of study can be constructed. The Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning has a 5-fold system of values which is self-consistent and which also is able to sustain itself as a workable theory in the human personality. The 5 values, as are well known, are truth, righteous conduct, peace, non-violence, and love. An educational institution can adopt an alternative system of values if it makes that system self-consistent and universal and lays down a workable theory of the human personality. Second recommendation. The Indian academic world needs to be enlightened on the pace-setting success story of Shri Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning in regard to effective and efficient implementation of the program of value-imbued higher education under the fabric of education in human values. This message should be disseminated among the universities, colleges, and other institutions of learning using a spectrum of communication media available in the country. 3. For implementing the above program in universities and colleges, a model blueprint may be designed by Shri Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning and copies made available to the interested institutions with the help of the Association of Indian Universities. 4. Periodical visits to this institute as well as other similar institutes by vice chancellors, principals, teachers, etc. in groups may be scheduled, and the institutes requested to undertake the responsibility of implementing such programs according to their convenience. This way, many universities could immensely benefit. Of course, for this purpose, the institutes will need to be suitably strengthened. 5. As University Grants Commission is presently on the program of setting up a good number of academic staff training colleges in universities, with a view to orienting teachers already in service and those entering the profession, it is appropriate now for making value-imbued education an integral part of their training program. 6. Apart from visits by vice chancellors and others, it would be helpful if a brochure on value orientation in higher education is prepared along with a video presentation. The Association of Indian Universities in turn would do well to make copies of the brochure and cassette and make them available to all the universities in the country. 7. The symposium is all appreciation for the excellent manner in which awareness programs and foundation courses have been imaginatively interwoven into the fabric of both undergraduate and postgraduate curricula at this institute. 8. It is noted with great interest that emphasis has been unmistakably laid on linkages between business ethos and values in the 6 units constituting the core of the foundation courses, not only in the business management program, but also in the Bachelor of Education syllabus at this institute. 9. A very strong recommendation the symposium would like to make is value orientation without being confined to the tertiary level of education, but carried down the line to the level of secondary as well as elementary education. In other words, there should be a well chalked out program of value impregnated education right from primary school to institutions of higher learning. 10. Another recommendation which the symposium wishes to make is in respect of foundation courses made compulsory at the level of higher education. These courses should deal with our cultural heritage, linguistic dimensions of education, history of India, Indian freedom struggle, population education, history of growth of science in India, progress of Indian agriculture and industry, planning processes, resource management, human resource development, and India's role in international cooperation and world peace movement. In short, these are to be so designed as to promote unity of India and the spirit of patriotism. 11. A cell for promotion of in-depth studies in sciences as well as humanity and social sciences as interrelated disciplines followed by action-oriented programs should be set up in each university. 12. Youth and student welfare activities covering sports, physical education, athletics, debates, drama, adventure activities, and other extracurricular programs should be organized with a view to inculcating qualities of leadership, team spirit, discipline, and service-mindedness, and participation in such activities by the students should be given academic credit. And lastly, but not the least, social service schemes should be made an integral part of extension education programs of the universities and should be made compulsory, and due academic credit should be awarded so that student interest may be continually animated. The National Symposium records its gratitude to the University Grants Commission for its encouragement and is thankful to the chairman of the UGC for his thoughtful message. We also record our appreciation of the complimentary observations made by the high-level committee of the Association of Indian Universities, which visited this campus in March 1986. We note that the Association of Indian Universities has provided beneficial inputs for the holding of the National Symposium. The National Symposium is greatly indebted to the revered Chancellor, sir, for your splendidly inspiring inaugural address, spelling out in broad details the current national, international malaise, and for suggesting concrete plan of action in the area of education, which is basic for development. You very kindly, sir, urged that the universities should get themselves organized in an appropriate manner to focus their attention on solving problems relating to value orientation in education, despite limitations and constraints. We wholeheartedly endorse the views of the revered Chancellor and accept his suggestions and strongly recommend that the universities in our country should deliberate on these issues and organize a large number of conferences, symposia, workshops from which concrete recommendations would emerge. We are grateful to Dr. Ram Reddy, Vice Chancellor, Indira Gandhi National Open University, and President of the Association of Indian Universities, and my boss, who as chief guest gave a thought-provoking address emphasizing the need for adherence to basic values for promoting national integration and fostering the unity of the human race and indivisibility of world peace. In this context, Professor Reddy pleaded for acceptance of the 5 basic human values: truth, righteous conduct, peace, love, and non-violence, which constitute the quintessence of all religions and faiths and universal cultural ethos. The position paper on the implementation of program of education in human values in Sri Sathya Sai Institute, presented to the National Symposium, gave a brilliant exposition of the goals, objects, and perspectives which set the tone for in-depth deliberations at the symposium. The position paper also presented a graphic account of the activities being followed in the Institute daily and year-round for the promotion of educational excellence as well as institutional development. The participants of the symposium also benefited by witnessing a video presentation of the multifaceted activities enumerated in the position paper. The curricular, co-curricular, self-reliance, and social service programs have been interwoven into the tapestry of the daily life of the Institute, which is highly rich and fully educational. Both the position paper and the video documentary need to be brought to the notice of other educational institutions in a suitable manner. The participants view with admiration the remarkable rapport that exists on this campus between the teachers and the students, which reflects itself in their total, complete, and meaningful involvement in all aspects of campus life. The revered Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, along with the faculty, are an integral part of this educational process. The Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning presents a brilliant image of a well-knit family. It is a feast for one's eye to see the dynamic functioning of this well-organized academic community under the inspiring guidance and unfailing personal interest of the revered Chancellor, as the father of the family, ably assisted by its dedicated Vice Chancellor. In the end, I wish to thank the revered Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, staff and students of this great institute for extending their kindness and hospitality to us and giving us the opportunity to deliberate on these important issues so vital for the future of our country. We seek Baba's blessings in the difficult tasks ahead of us. Sai Ram.
I have been a teacher for many years, and I have faced audiences large and small. But please do believe me, this time when I have the revered Chancellor sitting to the left of me and all of you in front of me, I am scared. We have had 3 days of conference with many Vice Chancellors. They are all very eminent men, but they are very easily handled because they are fellow professionals and it is easy to talk to them. However, to talk to you who have benefited much more from the basic principles of knowledge, I really have to count on Swami's blessings. I therefore thought I would begin with a brief story. That it is said at one time, when the world was relatively without too much trouble, Sri Parvati bowed down before her husband, the Lord of the universe, and asked, Kena margena bhoswamin dehi brahmamayo bhavet tat kripam kurume swamin namami charanautava. And he then go on to enunciate the principle of knowledge embodied in the Guru. And in the functioning of this principle of knowledge, he does talk about the fact that knowledge has to be complete and all-embracing, indivisible and manifest in all aspects of human activity. Akhanda mandalagaram vyaptam yena characharam tatpadam darshidam yena tasmai Sri Gurave namaha. Nirasta sarva sandeham ekigritya sudarshanam rahasyam yo darshayedi bhajami gurumeshwara. In my own student days, both as a student in school and in college, and much more when I was a student working for my doctor's degree, I have been blessed with teachers who have, in some imperfect way, fulfilled these requirements. So I have come to realize, and in some sense practice to the extent that it is possible for me, that knowledge at its best is indivisible and embrace all aspects of knowing, both small and large, both static and dynamic, the living and the non-living, the social and the personal. And therefore, it seems to me almost obvious, axiomatic, that we must develop skills and insights into all areas of human activity, and certainly into how to live right. Most of my life, I have been a scientist and pursuing the inner workings of the laws of nature. It has been both my duty and my joy. In this, I have had the recognition that science is a discipline, and in the process of practicing science, I have redesigned myself. And part of this redesigning involves being able to see how the world around you becomes different when you observe it with attention. That when you make the study of nature your life, that you have to be wedded to a few principles. And these principles sound awfully like the principles that have been enunciated about how life should be. For example, a scientist who is really interested in making discoveries, being one with the universe, truthfulness is an essential necessity. Science is dealing with all of nature, and therefore to deal with nature, one must go by the right procedure, by the right conduct. If you decided to go and find out what is the nature of life and started looking at it without paying due attention, life will disappear from you. If you try to discover what atoms are made of without paying attention to the right procedure, then the atoms will not reveal their secrets. And if you try to catch a moonbeam to find out what it is made of, the moonbeam ceases to be. One has almost to be in love with nature, to be able to identify oneself with nature, to be able to find out what nature is like. It doesn't come in a day, it doesn't come in a year, it doesn't come even within a lifetime, but one approximates, one moves towards this one as much as possible. That after a while, you do not think of science out there or science in here, but science becomes a way by means of which you deal with the world. And the world is then no longer different from you, that a researcher absorbed in his laboratory or in his calculations or in his thought about the universe does not know where he is, whether he is inside his body or outside, whether he is thinking or the nature is thinking for him. What is the result of such a devotion to science? One of them, of course, you do become famous. But fame is a transient thing, especially when you know that for things for which you should become famous, you don't. And for things which you should not become famous, very often you do. And one doesn't have the courage and the strength to go on correcting the rest of the world. And who knows, maybe they are right and you do not know. But what comes in is a kind of joy mixed with a certain kind of peace, a kind of satisfaction, a kind of enjoyment which passeth normal understanding. It is something which is non-possessive because that joy increases by communicating it to other people. In fact, one may say that the most interesting part of the life of a scientist is not only in discovery, but in fact in making somebody else discover and not find a difference between yourself and the person who discovers it. You only find out that somebody else has discovered when you see the gleam in the other person's eye and not in your own. But then you feel exactly the same way when you see the sign of mischief in your children's eyes instead of your own. So the 5 principles that Dr. Jagadish Narayan mentioned, that has been the essential principles behind this great institution, are really not very different from the way that one relates to science. And that is not a coincidence, that is a necessity, because science too is a human activity. And any proper human activity, these 5 components, the 5-fold path, is a necessary thing. As Vice Chancellor Saraf had mentioned to you, a few years ago I had the good fortune to be able to address a convocation which probably is a record for the world, to have approximately 10 lakh of people listening to a scientist talk about the world. And at that time I talked about binocular vision, that I had said that many people ask me, how come you who are a practicing scientist is interested in spiritual matters? That usually when a scientist becomes interested in spiritual matters, it means that either he is over the hill, or he is a charlatan, or both. And I have great difficulty in trying to argue with them, because I could not comprehend how a person could not be both spiritual and scientific at the same time. I do believe that even though technically a person interested in spirituality may not be thought of as being scientific, in fact, most of his relationship with the world is very scientific. Is in fact looking at things, looking at oneself, looking at events and things with love in one's heart, with the right procedure, with the truthful approach, with non-violence. These are in fact the hallmarks of a scientist. That in fact what we need is a little more clarity in the nature of what science is and what science education should be. Usually I have a sankalpa that I will not quote except from great religious preceptors, traditional literature, or my own writings. But this time I will violate the thing and quote from my friend Professor Unitha, who in an article which he recently wrote, talked about one of the needs. The universities should provide instruction and organize life and activities which would promote, and I quote, understanding of the spirit of science and use of the scientific method in solving problems of life. Notice that it is problems of life and not necessarily producing more wealth, because wealth can be produced by so many activities, and if that is the only purpose of science, science is really not a very distinguished thing. End of quote. I would like to suggest, therefore, that science and spiritual life are really not very different. In fact, spiritual life is not different from the proper life for any walk of life, whether one be a scientist, one be an artist, one be a writer, one be an accountant, and one be a businessman. And therefore, I invite your attention to many of the recommendations that were made by our national seminar, and see in your own chosen walk of life, in your own particular relation to the world at large, are not all these principles relevant? Replace in appropriate places vice chancellors by oneself, or principals by oneself, institutions by the group of people whom you are able to influence and to come in contact with, and ask yourself the question, are these not the same principles that we want to propagate in all walks of life? That every man is an acharya, every man is a teacher, because in some sense it is by mutual instruction and mutual communication that we grow. And therefore the binocular vision is not only for the scientist, but for almost any walk of life. That in fact, without, and as I had mentioned last time, one of the advantages of binocular vision is that the two eyes provide slightly different perspectives on things. And it is desirable that they do so, because by combining the two, one finds a perception in depth. The third dimension appears to leap at you when you have the binocular vision. If you have only vision with one eye, unless you do have considerable experience, you do not perceive depth. But with two eyes, you do perceive depth. That things stand out in perspective when you have more than one vision. That the spiritual life by itself is not for everyone, that one must be in the world, one must be working with other people, and the spiritual life should coexist, not replace the thing, not eliminate ordinary life, nor be swept away by ordinary life, but must coexist with it, so that one may perceive things as they really are. I also would like to mention to you the fact that one of the bonuses of being an academic is the fact that one tends to deal with ideas and with expressions. And as time goes by, and as one becomes more and more aware of the multiple meanings that words are capable of doing, one finds that the expressions of basic truths in many walks of life are very, very similar. So similar, in fact, that there is an saving of the labor of remembering two things. In the exhibition that we were taken to see, one had almost to move at the speed of light to be able to cover the whole thing within the time allotted. Nevertheless, I did manage to see a few things, and one of the things that I saw, while physics was very impressive and chemistry was much more exciting, when I saw the mathematics exhibition, I found one little display panel which talked about the notion of limits and neighborhoods, and showed a large number of lines converging, and Swami standing at the end and saying that I am the limit, you approach me, you never reach me, but you are always in my neighborhood. Within any neighborhood of me, there are several of you. I don't know who wrote it. I'm told that it's one of the students. Obviously, he's a gifted and blessed man. But a statement like this one not only would mean a great deal to your heart, but you will never forget your topology after that. You will never have to remember what is meant by a neighborhood, what is meant by a limit, and in what sense a limit belongs and what sense a limit does not belong, and what sense a limit which is different from all these elements of the sequence completes the space. That a complete space contains limit points which are never reached but which are always having neighborhoods in which there are arbitrarily many amongst you. I have myself come across a number of expressions like this in various other walks of life, but nothing as touching as this one. Of course, chance events very often convey similar things. I remember many years ago, some miscreants caught hold of a jet belonging to Trans World Airlines and got it to force land someplace in the Middle East, and eventually they blew it up. But in that jet, there happened to be a young man who was coming back after his father's final ceremonies in India. He was living in the United States, and all he took from his father's possessions was his copy of the Ramayana, because he felt he did not need anything else to remind him of his father. And when faced with this situation in which you never know what the madmen were going to do, he opened the book, and the passage that he read from the thing was something like, "I shall be with you always." My wife was reading the newspaper and she read it to me, and I didn't say anything, and she looked at me and found that tears were coming from my eyes. And she said, "What's the matter with you?" So I said, "No, nothing is the matter with me." But she said, "But tears are coming from your eyes." I said, "I am very moved." She said, "Moved by what? I mean, the plane is not moving, nothing is moving. What moved you?" So I said, "This sentence is almost like a promise which I had wished to hear from somebody, but I have heard it in terms of this particular statement." So, to conclude my talk, I really have to say two more things. One, that I am very delighted that I was present at this meeting. I am not a Vice Chancellor, no vices. I am not a Chancellor of anything, and I am not a very wise man, but I am very pleased to have been included, and I feel very blessed having been asked to talk to you. It seems, I will end this thing with a story. It seems when Lord Narasimha had appeared, he was in a very Raudra mode, and the world was shivering. After destroying the miscreant, nobody knew how to cool him down. But eventually they sent Prahlada to him, and he prostrated at the feet of Lord Narasimha. And Narasimha took him and put him in his lap and patted him. And in this fashion he became quiet. So somebody told Prahlada, "You are fit to be the king because you are a very brave man. Even though you are only a small boy, you have had the courage to face that which frightens everybody. You looked at the face. Nobody could look at the face." He said, "I didn't look at his face. I only looked at his feet." Sai Ram.